Today, my friends, it's a battle of the nines. The Sony Bravia 9 versus the Hisense U9N. How do they compare? Well, we're about to find out. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Caleb Denison, and I'm not gonna lie to you right now. I am super jet lagged. In fact, the only thing that's keeping me going today is this particular video is something that I've been looking forward to for a long time. Had the Bravia 9 hanging out for a few weeks. The U9N has been hanging out for a few weeks, and I thought, you know what? I really want to compare these two because the U9N from Hisense is aggressively priced considering its performance capabilities. The Bravia 9 from Sony is the best mini LED TV made to date, according to many, including myself. So I really want to see how the two compare. You'll find that depending on the size and whether one is on sale or the other is on sale, the price difference between these two, size per size, could be anywhere from $500 to $1,000 more for the Sony. So I'm really interested to see just how close Hisense gets at its lower price to the Sony, which many regard to be one of the finest mini LED TVs that you can buy right now. I'm gonna start with the Hisense U9N. Well, this TV is heavy and I need to use the energy I've got while I've got it. You'll notice that we're going to be unboxing a 75-inch Hisense U9N, and we're gonna be unboxing a 65-inch Sony Bravia 9. I understand that may seem unfair given the size differences, but it's really not. The picture quality between the two is going to be easily discernible, even though they're a different size. So try to get past that. If anything, the only issue with reviewing two different size TVs is getting them matched up in the shot, but that's for me to worry about, not you. I hope that makes the cut. I may have gotten it over here without Zeke's help, but 100% I'm gonna need help getting this TV out of the box. Okay, and then let's go ahead and lay this down in front of the TV. Tip. All right. Oh, see, already got problems. We gotta get the legs out of the top of the box. Do as I say, not as I do, my friends. Like, you should always open the top of the box first, even if you know that the outer box is gonna come off the top. So, okay. I do have to say, I'm glad that Hisense packs this TV so well. Like, there's a lot of protection for it, and there needs to be, because like I said, it is a heavy ass TV. To that end, I'm happy to see that we've got metal feet. Also like that there are some cable management clips on the backs of the feet here. That gets overlooked. I'm telling you, like, it seems really hit or miss. Even within a manufacturer's product lineup, whether you're gonna get any kind of cable management. All right, nice little peel, here we go. Will we tip the TV over? Absolutely not. This thing's way too heavy for that. And now it's time to move to the Bravia 9. Okay, here, Bravia 9 time. Now here's the deal. I know that most people don't care about this. This is a TV reviewer problem. But Sony now packs their more expensive TVs like insanely, exceptionally well. If you're gonna keep the box and you know, move it in its box, prepare yourself for a slightly frustrating process. You'll see what I mean in a second. There's all these, like, you know, L-shaped, well, kind of like this, but smaller, cardboard pieces. They're intended to keep the rigidity of the box at a high level, but they just make reboxing things so difficult. Let's get the stuff off the top, like I should have done on the last one. We have a remote that did not make it back into its packaging. A provided USB-A to USB-C cable. That's for charging the remote. Almost forgot. Rechargeable remote. Good job, Sony. Also, the screws seem to have made their way into that. I think this is some kind of, yeah, these plastic caps are for cable management. Then we get two Now these are metal feet. They are solid metal. In fact, part of it feels like cast iron, honestly. Maybe you have to unbox a lot of TVs to get it, but like the Sony does have a more premium feel to it. I feel that's important because you're gonna spend quite a bit more money on a Sony TV, that old Sony tax we're always talking about, which, by the way, I don't know if I can talk about this yet, but I now know where part of that Sony tax money is going. When I'm allowed to tell you, you're gonna be impressed. I'll say this. There's a reason why Sony's screen uniformity tends to be better than everybody else's. Subscribe. If you wanna hear about that, subscribe now because I will be telling you about that soon. What a time. All right, am I gonna tip the TV? Will Caleb tip the TV? No, not today. Not today. 5 plastic pieces. Oh, here's another one. 6 to go on the back of this TV. That's excessive. I've said it before, I'm gonna say it again, that's excessive. Yeah, this heavy panel. Oh man, you know, yes, there are a couple of tiny little subwoofers on the back of the Hisense. The Bravia 9 here is one of the best sounding TVs we've ever reviewed, including Sony's own like acoustic surface sound technology, which basically makes the OLED screen the speaker. But yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing this TV again because I know it sounds so good. Okay, so do we want this low slung? I feel like we do want this low slung because we need all the vertical clearance that we can get. I think I'm gonna run the Apple TV on a switch and see if it'll pass Dolby Vision for us. That's not typical. This review unit's been around for a while, so it doesn't have some of the protective film that we would normally see, but there she is, the Bravia 9, you know, about as thick as the Hisense is, to be honest with you. Also, it does the sound optimization as part of the setup process, the initial setup process, which I like. Also, Sony's always trying to force Samba TV down your throat, and like, you have to say no twice. So, I mean, they get some stuff right and they get some stuff wrong. Okay, so here's what we got going on here. We've got the Apple TV run into a Blackbird HDMI splitter running to both TVs. So right now we're in HDR. I do have the Apple TV set up to match frame rate and match the content's dynamic range. So if I play an SDR video, it'll be in SDR on both screens. The Apple TV home screen is gonna be in HDR. And then, you know, if I pull up a Dolby Vision title, I'll get Dolby Vision on both TVs. I've tested that, everything seems to be working great. First thing I gotta say, just looking at the Apple TV home screen, the two look remarkably similar. I'm in filmmaker mode on the Hisense, and we are in the professional mode on the Sony with everything maxed out. So that means that we've got local dimming. Well, local dimming's on high for the Hisense. It's on medium for the Sony, but I can switch that to high if I want to. I know the Sony tends to perform better if I keep it on medium. And then I've also got the peak brightness on the Sony, currently gradation preferred, but I can do brightness preferred if I need to. I just want to see what the default filmmaker mode HDR ends up looking like between the two TVs. The color on each is very, very close. That's with 0 calibration on either the Sony or the Hisense, which I think is a testament to the Hisense's out-of-box color accuracy in filmmaker mode. That's really impressive. I'd be interested to test them to see what the Delta E on the Hisense is like, but I'm gonna have to say it's no more than a 3 or 4 because any differences are basically imperceptible, and that's a great start for the Hisense, honestly. Now, I did notice when I loaded up the YouTube app that the Sony retained better background gray levels than the Hisense. The Hisense kind of blew that out a little bit, but not in a significant way. Shout out Tech with KG. I was watching one of your videos earlier. So yeah, let's just go with a known piece of content. You may have noticed that the Hisense, when it's at complete black, appears to be a little bit deeper black than the Sony. I attribute that to the difference in the anti-glare treatment between the two. We do have a couple of studio lights on full blast right now, and neither one of them are showing any reflection issues. All right, so let's get down to comparison. This is a YouTube HDR video from Eugene Belsky. You know, we use this content all the time. I paused it right at the very beginning because we can immediately see some differences. Earlier, you heard me say the color looked very similar between the two. That was on the Apple home screen. Now, where the rubber meets the road, we see an immediate difference. I know for a fact that this cinematic word, the font, is supposed to be more orange than yellow. And as we can see here, it's very much orange on the Sony, but more yellow on the Hisense, calling into question the color accuracy of the Hisense right now. Let's pause here. I'm noticing that the Hisense is lighting up the highlights a little bit more than the Sony in this particular case. I've already noticed, just in scrubbing through this content, that the Sony is actually going to pump up brighter areas a bit more than the Hisense in some cases, which points to just a difference in processing decisions. So yeah, what we're seeing here is that the Hisense is definitely choosing to boost the average picture level, which gives it a brighter overall look. It also means the colors tend to be a bit more bright or vibrant, but it's also reducing the saturation of the color. So the Sony, that wooden bowl, looks more organic and wooden. It has less orange in it. And as a matter of fact, I feel like I'm seeing a little bit more detail in the leaves around that flower than I am on the Hisense. Now would be a good time to see what happens if we tell the Sony to do brightness preferred as opposed to gradation preferred. So in the Sony's brightness menu, we can see that it's maxed out. HDR tone mapping is currently at gradation preferred. We'll switch it to brightness preferred, and wow, what a difference. Let me back out of the menu. Now, the Bravia 9 is clearly brighter than the Hisense in this particular case. The wood has taken on that lighter, less saturated look. It's now a little bit more yellow than brown, you know, making the Hisense wood look a little bit more natural. But oh my gosh, the intensity of the brightness in the whites is just unmistakable. Honestly, I'm having a tough time deciding which I'd rather be viewing. I'd probably go with gradation preferred though. Okay, so I've paused on this cat, and the reason I've done that is because I've gone into the Hisense and I've turned on its dynamic HDR tone mapping. The peak brightness setting was already at maxed out, and the local dimming setting also maxed out. Turned on dynamic tone mapping, and it did step up in brightness a bit. It's closer to the Sony than it was before, but the Sony is definitely out brightening the Hisense in this particular case. So yeah, by all accounts, if you want it to, it appears, at least for now, that the Sony can get just a touch brighter than the Hisense U9N, albeit at expense of some of the highlight detail. So once again, I'm going to go to the HDR tone mapping and change that to gradation preferred. Back out. And yeah, the Hisense has a little bit of an advantage in the brightest areas of the image. You can really see the glow of the light on that rose, whereas you could not see it on the Sony. And you can see the Sony is now a bit dimmer than the Hisense. So the lesson here is, I think in a brighter room, you're definitely going to want to have brightness preferred on the Sony. In a darker room, you can probably get away with gradation preferred and expect the picture to be a little bit more accurate. But the idea that the Hisense was just going to blow the Bravia 9 out of the water, not playing out in real life here. Now, if we shift our attention away from the brightness, I'm looking at the black levels on each, and they are very evenly matched. Here's a great example. I would expect to see a lot of blooming around this flower, and at least on angle, I do not. But you know what? That brings up a really interesting question. What's the difference off angle? Yeah, there's a little tiny bit of a halo around that flower off angle with the Sony. but like I'm struggling to see it. Frankly, if the Hisense weren't so jet black itself, I wouldn't even notice. But you know what else I notice is that the Sony's off-angle like color saturation and contrast is better. And frankly, personally, that's a trade-off I'm willing to take. On angle, very, very similar. Off angle, the Hisense maintains, you can see that it has slightly more refined backlight control, at least in terms of zones. So it's mitigating halo maybe a little bit better, but the color retention slash saturation and contrast on the Sony is better off angle. You guys, this Hisense U9N looks so good. Just from the HDR content I'm watching right now, honestly, I did not expect it to be this close. Ooh, there is something worth showing. All right, so this might be difficult to see through the camera on whatever screen you're watching, but one area in which the Sony is a little bit more refined is in its handling of banding. You know, this is YouTube content, it's compressed. I'm seeing less defined lines in the fork. In fact, I'm gonna get up and show this. So what you're looking at is right here. There are more defined lines here on the Hisense than there are on the Sony. They're there, you can definitely see them, but you can tell that the Sony's processor is smoothing out that color banding a little bit better than the Hisense. What I'm noticing here is that the TVs are so insanely close together in a way I was not expecting that I'm having to dive deep, and I mean get super picky to find any of the differences. The texture and the detail, the pop of the HDR on the Hisense is amazingly close to the Sony, and I'm just noticing that in certain areas, Sony's making slightly different decisions than the Hisense processor is. Okay, so just got into the Sony, and I'll take you through all the settings that I adjusted here. I basically am making SDR as bright as it possibly can be, just to get sort of a baseline understanding. So under the brightness menu, you can see I've maxed out the SDR brightness. I've also left the advanced contrast enhancer off, as I did in HDR. Local dimming's at medium. It just tends to perform best there. And then peak luminance SDR has now been jacked up to high. If I drop it down to low, which was the default, you can see that it's a little bit closer to whatever the Hisense is doing now, but pretty sure that Hisense is in standard mode. But again, I'm maxing things out, right? We want to see what the most intense SDR brightness looks like for SDR content. So for the Hisense, I'm gonna go ahead and choose Theater Day as a shortcut because I think that it's gonna make it a little bit easier to get the peak brightness that I want. Local dimming is at high, peak brightness is at high. Brightness right now only at 80, so I'm gonna max it out just like I did on the Sony. And let's see, what else do we wanna do? Let's just check the clarity settings and make sure. Smooth gradients on low here. Motion enhancement, standard, let's turn that off for now. And we'll leave the smooth gradient at low for now, but I reserve the right to adjust that and give the Hisense its best shot at, you know, smoothing out any color banding that we may see. All right, well, color temperature on this white is clearly different. The Hisense tends to be a little bit more gray than the Sony, which is a much crisper white. Now, I know that Sony does not necessarily calibrate to D65, which probably explains a little bit of that. Well, let's see what it looks like in real life. Okay, so for SDR brightness, the Sony is definitely coming out on top here. Again, I'm giving each TV its absolute best chance. The difference between the two though, like, it's only gonna show up in a few scenes. I do feel like the skin tones on Phil Mickelson and Grant Horvat here are, well, they look a little more natural on the Hisense, to be honest with you. Colors, really similar, a little bit brighter on the Sony, maintaining saturation a little bit better on the Sony as well. Very slight differences. So yeah, right here is a perfect example. There's a lot more detail in the tree over John Daly's shoulder here. It's a crisper, more detailed image of the tree's leaves with some more contrast and highlight happening there. Again, it's a really little thing, but that's the kind of advantage that I've noticed Sony having in particular areas like that. Maybe that is the big takeaway in this video, is it's the little picture elements. But I feel like when you add them all up, you start to understand where the advantage for Sony is here. I think the question for folks is going to be, is it $500 better, the Sony, or $1,000 better, you know, with the Sony, depending on the size of the TV that you're purchasing? I don't know for most folks that it will be. The Hisense U9N looks so incredible. This is going to absolutely blow people away. Hisense is doing a good job with its up conversion here. Wow, well, we are seeing some big differences in how these two TVs handle Dolby Vision. So on the Sony, I'm in Dolby Vision Bright, got everything maxed out. I messed with the HDR tone mapping, which you're not supposed to do with Dolby Vision, but Sony will allow it. It didn't help anything. This was actually the brighter of the two. On the Hisense, I'm in Dolby Vision Custom mode. Everything's maxed out. The brightest options outside of Dolby Vision IQ, clearly the Hisense is significantly brighter than the Sony in this particular case. I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing. I think during the day it would be. But wow, I mean, we are seeing all kinds of stutter out of the Hisense that we are not on the Sony. And again, that's with all motion smoothing disabled, right? The Sony is significantly smoother and less jarring to watch than the Hisense in this particular piece of content from Netflix. The lifted APL on the Hisense, though, is appealing in a lot of ways. Unfortunately, that added brightness makes the stutter and the judder a little bit more obvious, but it is pleasant to look at. Like, I definitely would prefer to watch the Hisense in a bright room, at least with this Dolby Vision content. The shadow details seem better in this really bright room environment, and I think that a lot of people are gonna like that. Okay, I switched to Dolby Vision Dark, and that's gonna make the Sony tough to see because of how we're exposed right now. But again, the Hisense is just taking a much brighter, punchier approach to everything in Dolby Vision. All right, well, I'll do a quick summary on the picture quality in a moment, but before we go too much further, I wanna go ahead and do an audio test real quick. Okay, I'll tell you this right now. The Sony stereo performance is vastly superior. The beamforming tweeters that are built into this TV really help with that. I'm not gonna make a comment about like Atmos effect right now. The Sony's bass response is better than the Hisense. I'm getting more width out of the Hisense, but that's because of the speaker placement and also the size of the TV. Not in love with either one of them, the way they're handling the treble, but the Sony is definitely cleaner and more well refined. It's less splatty, less raspy. Both decent sounding TVs, but if I had to pick one over the other, I'm picking the Sony every day. Well guys, that was just a ton of fun and really revealing for me. I've seen both TVs on their own, but never side by side. What I learned today is that the Hisense U9N is getting dangerously close to the Sony Bravia 9. There are some key differences. I've noticed that the Sony can out-brighten the Hisense in, maybe 2/3 of scenarios. Dolby Vision appears to be the exception, where the Hisense is kind of lifting everything up. But the Bravia 9 can certainly get very, very bright and compete very easily with the U9N, which I kind of expected to over-brighten the Sony. That didn't end up being the case, so I was a little bit surprised by that. The rest of the differences are super minute, and you've got to have a really sharp eye to catch most of them. The banding cleanup on the Sony was superior in most cases. There was one exception, and I made a quick little adjustment, and then it was about the same. I noticed that the motion on the Sony does appear to be superior to the Hisense. I think that's one big area for sports watchers in particular, where there's a lot of fast camera moving going on. Sony might be preferred in those particular instances, but again, with the Hisense, you can employ a little bit of motion smoothing and compensation and probably get a pretty stinking clear picture out of it. The last advantage I felt like Sony had is going to be really minute, and that is in the sharpness of some background objects. It just does a better job of cleaning things up and upscaling lower resolution content than the Hisense, but man, by a very, very small margin. Not something that I know a lot of people are going to notice. So if we take the picture quality differences on the whole, I'd say most people aren't going to notice the difference. Those with really sharp eyes will see that the Sony is superior in a few little areas, but man, I'm really impressed with how close the Hisense got to the Sony in this particular shootout. So what's left after picture and audio? It's the user experience. It's the small touch points. I tend to like Sony's remote. It's rechargeable. It's a little bit more compact. The Hisense remote's a little bit bigger. It's silvery. It doesn't feel quite as premium. The actual on-screen user interface, once you get past the initial setup, is very similar. Sony just has its particular kind of layout, whereas Hisense has its particular kind of layout. I'm going to call that a draw. From a purely aesthetic standpoint, they're about the same level of thickness. The Hisense does have the little wing speakers on either side, which may sway you one way or the other. Just be aware of that. There were a couple of moments during unboxing where I felt like the Sony gave me more premium touch points, but to be honest with you, once the TVs are actually set up, that stuff tends to go away. And the day-to-day use is what really matters. And from that standpoint, I feel like the TVs are pretty evenly matched. Sony, charging a bit more. I do feel like in this particular case, we got really lucky with a very uniform panel on the U9N and an equally uniform panel on the Bravia 9. Your mileage may vary there, but I do know that Sony does a lot to make sure that it has very even uniform panels in general. With Hisense, I'm not sure they're doing similar kind of work. I do believe there are instances in which the Sony Bravia 9 has slightly superior picture quality, but not the kind of superiority that's going to be readily apparent to everyone. The Hisense is already starting to look like a better deal. At the end of the day, I think that the Hisense is going to be a smarter buy for more people. It does an amazing job. I mean, it is a truly first-class TV. The Bravia 9, on the other hand, going to be more suitable for purists or people who are extremely picky about picture quality. And I suppose if you're in that latter camp, you're going to be willing to pony up a few extra $100 to get it. Really though, the takeaway for me here is I'm just shocked that the Hisense U9N got so close to the Sony Bravia 9, which makes me wonder, what are we staring down for 2025? I think we're going to see a new U9 out of Hisense. I think that the Bravia 9 is going to stick around for a little bit longer as the premium flagship mini LED TV out of Sony. And so the real question for me is going to be, what happens with the 2025 U9 series from Hisense? Is it going to catch up with the Bravia 9 in some key ways? That'll be really interesting to find out. And now that we have this as a baseline, I think we're going to be able to figure that out pretty stinking quickly. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. What did you think of this kind of comparison video? I really want to know, because if you liked it, we will do more just like this. So let me know down in the comments right now. That feedback is super crucial. Helps us form this channel to make sure that we're making content that you actually want. Don't forget to hit that like button if you did like it. Subscribe to see more. I'll see you on the next one. And until then, here's 2 other videos I think you might like. Review the aguas frescas. We're here to review